the worthless swamp that bankrupted my aunt.
My grandfather Arthur was the kind of man who pinched every penny until it screamed, not because he was greedy, but because he grew up with nothing during the Depression and wanted to build an empire for his family, or at least that is what we all thought until the day of his funeral, which was the most pitiful display of fake grief I have ever witnessed in my entire 24 years of life. My Aunt Linda, who had not visited Grandpa in a nursing home for 3 years because the smell offended her delicate sensibilities, was currently draped over his mahogany casket, sobbing into a silk handkerchief that probably cost more than my tuition for a semester, while her husband, Rick, checked his watch every 30 seconds like he had a tea time to catch. I sat in the back row dry-eyed and numb because I had already done my morning during those long Sunday afternoons, playing chess with Grandpa while his health faded, listening to him tell stories about the old days while his own children were too busy spending his money to answer his phone calls. The tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a knife, not because of sadness, but because everyone was waiting for the reading of the will, like vultures circling a fresh carcass. We all gathered in the family estate library afterwards, a massive room filled with leather-bound books that Aunt Linda had never opened, and the family attorney, Mr. Henderson, sat behind the desk with a grim expression that told me he knew exactly what was about to happen. Linda was practically vibrating with excitement. She had already hired a contractor to remodel the kitchen and was talking loudly about turning Grandpa's workshop into a yoga studio. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence, and began to read. To my daughter Linda, he droned, I leave the entirety of my investment portfolio valued at approximately $4 million, as well as the family estate at 42 Oak Creek Lane, including all furniture, vehicles, and assets therein. Linda let out a squeal that she tried to disguise as a sob, gripping Rick's hand while shooting a smug, triumphant look in my direction. My stomach dropped not because I wanted the money, but because I knew she would erase every trace of him the second she got the keys. And to my grandson, Michael, Mr. Henderson continued, his eyes locking onto mine with a strange glint, who gave me the only thing money cannot buy, his time. I leave the south lot, encompassing 40 acres of undeveloped marshland, and the contents of my old fishing tackle box. A few cousins snickered because the south lot was a joke, a swampy, mosquito-infested patch of land 5 miles away that Grandpa had bought for pennies in the 60s and never used it, was completely worthless. Linda walked over to me, placing a manicured hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "Do not worry, sweetie. We cannot all be winners. Maybe you can build a little hut in the swamp and live like Shrek." She laughed a cruel, high-pitched sound and told me I had until the weekend to pack my things and get out of her house. I took the tackle box and left without a word. I drove out to the south lot that evening, parking my beat-up sedan on the muddy shoulder of the road, looking out at the reeds and the stagnant water, feeling utterly defeated. I opened the rusty tackle box, expecting to find tangled line and dull hooks, but instead, sitting right on top, was a sealed envelope with my name on it in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. I tore it open, my hands trembling, and pulled out a letter and a very complicated-looking map. "Dear Michael," the letter read, "if you are reading this, then Linda has undoubtedly been gloating. Let her enjoy it for a few days because she does not know about the easement." I frowned, squinting at the map, and then I saw it highlighted in bright yellow marker. The map was not just of the swamp, it was a survey of the entire county. I looked closer, and my heart nearly stopped beating, because the south lot was not just a swamp, it was a strategic strip of land that lay directly between the main highway and the new luxury housing development that the city had just approved. And more importantly, it contained the only natural water source for the entire valley. But the real kicker, the absolute genius of Grandpa Arthur, was the second document in the envelope, a notarized contract from 1982. It turns out the family estate, the one Linda just inherited, did not have its own sewage line connection. For 40 years, the estate had been relying on a septic drainage field that was located, you guessed it, on the south lot. I drove straight to the county clerk office the next morning just to be sure. The clerk, an old woman named Mrs. Higgins, who remembered Grandpa fondly, pulled the records and started laughing. "Oh, honey," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "Your grandfather was a wicked man. That septic permit expired 10 years ago. He kept renewing it on a temporary basis. But since the ownership of the land just split, the grandfather clause is void. I did not fully understand legalese, but I understood the next part perfectly. Basically, she explained, the mansion at 42 Oak Creek Lane is now legally uninhabitable until it gets a new sewage connection, and the only way to run a pipe to the main line is through your swamp. I went back to the estate 3 days later, and movers were everywhere. Linda was shouting orders, pointing at Grandpa's favorite armchair, and telling them to take it to the dump. When she saw me, she rolled her eyes and said, "I told you to be gone by Sunday, Michael. Do I need to call the police?" "Actually," I said, pulling the cease and desist order from my backpack, "I think the city might beat you to it." She snatched the paper, her eyes scanning the legal jargon, and I watched the color drain from her face in real time. It was glorious. "This is ridiculous," she stammered. "I will just build a new septic tank." "You cannot," I replied calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "The new zoning laws prohibit septic tanks within 500 feet of a water source, and I own the water source, so you need to connect to the city line." "Fine," she screamed, "so I will connect to the city line." "Great idea," I smiled. "But to do that, you have to dig a trench through my property, and I am afraid I have big plans for that swamp. I am thinking of turning it into a sanctuary for endangered mosquitoes, so no digging allowed." Her face turned a shade of purple I did not know existed in nature. "How much?" she hissed. "How much do you want for that worthless patch of mud?" I pretended to think about it, tapping my chin while looking at the for sale sign she had already pounded into the front lawn. "Well," I said, "Grandpa always said, family should help family, so I am willing to grant you an easement for a price." The negotiation took 4 hours. Linda cried. She threatened. She even tried to call the police. But Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, just sat there shrugging and saying, "The boy has the deed, Linda. He has you over a barrel." In the end, she did not just pay me for the easement, because she was desperate to sell the house to cover Rick's gambling debts, and she could not sell a house with no working toilets. She had to buy the south lot from me entirely. And the price, well, let us just say the worthless swamp cost her exactly $4 million, which, ironically, was the exact amount of the investment portfolio she had inherited. I took the money, bought a small house with a big porch, and used the rest to start a foundation in Grandpa's name that helps elderly people who do not have families to visit them. As for Linda, she sold the estate, but after paying me and the taxes, she broke even. She lives in a condo now, and I heard she hates it because the neighbor above her takes tap dancing lessons, and every tap on her ceiling reminds her of the day she underestimated the boy with the tackle box.